Sarajevo, June 28, 1914. The morning sun glared against polished brass buttons and ceremonial uniforms as Archduke Franz Ferdinand's motorcade wound its way through the city. The crowd murmured with restless energy, some cheering, others scowling under their breath. Then came the gunfire. 2 shots, sharp and final, silenced the air. The Archduke slumped, his wife collapsed beside him. Within moments, blood stained the seats of the open car. The world would later be told this was the moment history changed, the spark that ignited the Great War. But beneath the smoke and chaos, another story simmered, one few would ever admit aloud. For months, coded letters had passed through embassies, secret telegrams had carried warnings of what might come, and yet security was laughably weak. Why? In Vienna, the court seethed with cold calculation. In Berlin, generals smirked at the perfect pretext. In London, politicians exchanged troubled glances, realizing the dominoes were already tipping. The assassination wasn't the cause of Europe's unraveling. It was the curtain finally being pulled back on a performance that had been rehearsed for years. The bullet didn't start the fire. It simply revealed how ready the world already was to burn. Even as the world mourned in public, another theater of power was already in motion. Behind velvet curtains and polished mahogany doors, Europe's leaders had been weaving a dangerous net of promises. Treaties signed in secrecy, agreements sealed with a handshake but never revealed to the public. In Paris, a diplomat tucked away a document that pledged French loyalty to Russia in the event of German aggression. In Berlin, generals whispered of a lightning strike plan to crush France before breakfast, should war come. In St. Petersburg, the Tsar's ministers courted Serbia with promises of protection that sounded noble, but masked their hunger to dominate the Balkans. These alliances weren't about peace, they were about leverage. Each empire acted as though it were playing a game of chess, convinced it could trap its rivals with clever maneuvers. But the board was far more tangled than anyone admitted. A single move in one capital could trigger a cascade of obligations across the continent, forcing nations into war whether they wished it or not. And while the public still grieved over Sarajevo, the men in smoky rooms and secret councils were already calculating gains and losses, not in lives, but in territories, trade routes, and thrones. Europe was bound together in a web so taut that it didn't need a spark. It only needed the faintest tremor to rip apart. Far from the battlefields, in smoke-filled boardrooms and glittering salons, another group of players tightened their grip on Europe's fate. They were not kings, generals, or politicians, but financiers, industrialists, and magnates whose fortunes thrived in times of crisis. To them, war was not a calamity, it was an investment. Bankers in London quietly extended lines of credit to nations arming themselves. Steel barons in Germany lobbied for larger weapons contracts, their factories already humming with production. Oil tycoons eyed the Ottoman Empire, calculating which side's victory would open access to new fields. These men never appeared in official portraits, but their influence seeped into every decision made in palaces and parliaments. Rumors whispered of private dinners where defense ministers dined alongside arms dealers, where maps were unrolled not to plan peace, but to carve up future spoils. For every speech about honor and national pride delivered to the public, there was a backroom conversation about profit margins and market dominance. The Archduke's death had given governments a convenient justification, but the machinery of war was already being primed by those who stood to profit most. Every contract signed, every shipment of steel or coal, every loan advanced was another invisible thread binding nations to a conflict that seemed increasingly inevitable. While ordinary citizens mourned, cheered, or raged in the streets, the puppet masters were already pulling strings, ensuring that when war came, they would not be ruined by it. They would be enriched. While politicians debated in chambers and bankers struck deals in secret, Europe's generals played a more dangerous game, one of ego, pride, and ambition. To them, war was not a catastrophe to be avoided, but a stage upon which to etch their names into history. In Berlin, senior officers whispered about the Schlieffen Plan, a bold strike through Belgium meant to topple France in weeks. They spoke not with fear, but with relish, treating the plan like a grand performance awaiting its premiere. In Vienna, hawkish generals scorned diplomacy, insisting that Serbia must be crushed at all costs, lest Austria-Hungary appear weak. In St. Petersburg, the Tsar's advisors pushed for rapid mobilization, even as they knew their railways were ill-prepared. Every army believed it could outmaneuver the others, blind to the fact that they were all rushing toward the same abyss. False reports and planted intelligence fueled their arrogance. German officers circulated rumors of Russian war preparations. Russian spies leaked evidence of German mobilization. Each side believed they were acting defensively, when in truth, they were provoking one another into action. But beneath the bravado, something darker simmered: envy and rivalry among the generals themselves. Some sought personal glory, others longed to settle old grudges. Their pride turned strategy into theater, and the lives of millions into expendable pieces on a board. The assassination in Sarajevo might have opened the door, but it was the generals' obsession with outshining one another that pushed Europe through it. For them, war was not a last resort. It was the game they had been waiting to play. Amid the swirl of diplomats and generals, one shadowy figure stumbled upon the truth too soon. In a dimly lit office in Vienna, a mid-ranking intelligence officer intercepted a coded telegram between Berlin and Belgrade. Its contents hinted at something far more sinister than retaliation for an assassination. It outlined preparations, coordinated and deliberate, for a continental war. The spy, known only to his superiors as Agent V, realized what he held in his hands could shift the course of history. The document spoke of mobilization plans disguised as exercises, of supplies being routed in advance, of secret agreements ready to spring into action. If revealed, the message could expose that the war was not a tragic accident, but an orchestrated design. But knowledge is a dangerous weapon. Within days, Agent V began noticing strangers tailing him through crowded boulevards. At cafes, conversations fell silent when he entered. He sent warnings to allies, but his letters never reached their destinations. And one stormy night, as the lamplighters extinguished the streets of Vienna, Agent V vanished without a trace. Some claimed he defected. Others whispered he was silenced by his own government. His name never appeared in official records again. Yet fragments of his discovery resurfaced in unexpected places. An unsigned note in Paris, a burned cipher book found in Belgrade, proof that one man had glimpsed the machinery of war turning in the shadows and paid the price for knowing too much. Amid the swirl of diplomacy and deceit, passion quietly ignited where it never should have. In a lavish embassy ballroom, under chandeliers and the soft strains of a waltz, a forbidden romance began between a young Austrian diplomat, sworn to protect the empire's secrets, and the daughter of a high-ranking Russian minister, tied by loyalty to the Tsar. Their affair was reckless, intoxicating, and perilous. Between whispered declarations and hurried meetings in shadowed gardens, secrets slipped as easily as sighs. The diplomat, eager to impress, spoke of treaties tucked away in Vienna's archives. She, in turn, revealed that her father's circle was pushing for Russia to shield Serbia more aggressively than anyone dared admit. At first, their betrayal was unintentional, born of longing rather than malice. But soon both realized the power they held. He began to feed her false information to protect Austria's position. She reported only fragments to shield her father. Love became a weapon, each kiss concealing a calculation. But passion is a dangerous fuel. One night, as Vienna reeled from news of Austria's ultimatum to Serbia, the diplomat discovered a note hidden in her belongings, a copy of a secret agreement that should never have left the Foreign Office. Had she stolen it? Or had someone planted it to make her appear a spy? When confronted, her silence was more damning than confession. The man who once swore he'd defy nations for her now faced the possibility that the woman he loved most had betrayed both his heart and his country. In a world already teetering on the edge of war, their scandal threatened to be the tremor that collapsed the fragile balance. As diplomats schemed and armies mobilized, another battlefront emerged. One fought not with rifles, but with words. Newspapers across Europe filled their front pages with tales of villainy and heroism, each article dripping with national pride and venom for the enemy. In Berlin, the press painted Serbia as a nest of anarchists and assassins, savages unfit to share the European stage. In Belgrade, fiery pamphlets portrayed Austria as a dying empire, desperate to crush small nations to mask its own weakness. In Paris, caricatures mocked the Kaiser as a war-hungry tyrant. In London, headlines warned of German ambitions to dominate the continent. Each story bent truth into spectacle, feeding the public outrage like kindling to a fire. But these words did not appear by chance. Behind the presses, governments planted anonymous sources, leaked partial reports, and quietly paid editors to slant their stories. Propaganda bureaus churned out posters that romanticized sacrifice, turning soldiers into martyrs before the first shots were even fired. Even the assassination in Sarajevo became a weapon of narrative. Was Franz Ferdinand a martyr to civilization, or an oppressor finally overthrown? The answer depended on which newspaper one read that morning. For ordinary people, these stories were intoxicating. Coffee houses and taverns filled with citizens debating their enemies, convinced their nation's cause was righteous. Men enlisted with pride, women cheered, children played war games in the streets. Few realized they were being manipulated by invisible hands, their emotions stoked not for truth, but for strategy. The battlefield had not yet erupted in flames, but in the hearts and minds of Europe's citizens, the war had already begun. In the echoing halls of a dusty archive in Vienna, clerks discovered something unsettling. A treaty, one meant to guarantee stability in the Balkans, had vanished. It was no ordinary agreement. It pledged Austria and Russia to mutual restraint, a safeguard designed to prevent the very conflict now looming. Without it, Austria could justify its harsh ultimatum to Serbia, and Russia could claim no binding reason to stand aside. The disappearance was too precise, too convenient. Some whispered it was destroyed by Austrian hardliners eager to silence any document that chained their ambitions. Others accused Russian agents of removing it to wash away any hint of hypocrisy when the Tsar marched to war. And there were darker rumors still, that it was neither Austria nor Russia, but shadowy intermediaries working for financiers and arms dealers eager to clear the path for bloodshed. The few who had seen the treaty before it vanished swore it was real, pages signed, sealed, and stamped. But when summoned to testify, their voices faltered. One archivist recanted entirely, another fell suddenly ill and never recovered. The silence around the treaty became more suspicious than its disappearance. What had been drafted as a promise of peace now lived only in whispers and rumors. Without it, governments could proceed as if no such agreement had ever existed. And in the smoke-filled rooms of power, men who knew the truth smiled coldly. The treaty had not simply vanished, it had been erased. For months, suspicion had drifted from one capital to another, each government blaming its rival for pushing Europe toward the edge. But scattered clues, the missing treaty, Agent V's vanished telegram, the contradictions in propaganda stories, finally began to form a chilling pattern. It was not Serbia alone, nor Austria, nor even Germany or Russia that bore sole responsibility. The pieces pointed to someone far more calculating. A man woven into the very fabric of Europe's power structure, trusted by monarchs, respected by financiers, admired by generals. Outwardly, he was the picture of diplomacy and reason. Behind the curtain, he had been manipulating alliances, planting false intelligence, and feeding each nation's paranoia. His genius was subtlety. He never commanded armies nor signed declarations. Instead, he nudged egos, whispered warnings, and ensured every nation believed war was its only honorable path. He thrived on chaos, knowing that when the continent tore itself apart, his influence and his profits would be unmatched. When the truth surfaced, it was almost unthinkable. Could one man have orchestrated such vast destruction? Was he a lone spider at the center of the web, or merely the face of an entire network of hidden powers? As rumors of his role spread, officials scrambled to suppress them. Records were sealed, witnesses disappeared, and history books quietly blamed simpler causes. The mastermind's name was never written into the story of 1914. But for those who glimpsed the truth, the war no longer looked like a tragic accident. It looked like a masterpiece of design. By the time the first shells thundered across Europe, the narrative had already been written for the public. A single gunman in Sarajevo had sparked the Great War. It was a clean story, easy to digest, one that reduced catastrophe to a single moment of chance. But the truth was far messier and far more chilling. The alliances had been coiled like springs for decades, waiting only for an excuse. Generals had drawn up their plans long before Franz Ferdinand's carriage rolled through Sarajevo. Bankers had lined up credit. Factories had ramped up steel and munitions. Newspapers had prepared their battle cries. The assassination was not the cause. It was the permission. Every thread, secret treaties erased, propaganda machines churning, puppet masters scheming, generals hungering for glory, wove into a single tapestry. The war had not erupted by accident. It had been cultivated, engineered, and sustained by those who believed they could control the storm. And yet, once unleashed, the storm grew beyond anyone's grasp. The men who had dreamed of quick victories and profitable contracts found themselves staring into an abyss of endless trenches, ruined empires, and a generation lost. The carefully plotted chain reaction spiraled into chaos, leaving behind only one undeniable truth. The Great War had not been born of one bullet, nor one man, nor one moment. It had always been coming, written in the ambitions, rivalries, and greed of those who set the world on fire.